Right.
Okay, we start again. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear members of the European Association of Israel Studies, we are very happy to welcome you and to invite you for a very interesting, I hope, event, a very interesting discussion. This is already our third discussion held online. This time, the occasion is very important. Our members, our active members, our supporters, our colleagues has just recently published a book. The book is titled Being a Jew in the 21st Century, Central Europe. This is the book. And the book was edited by a team of international team, a team of great scholars from Moshe Mendelssohn Center in Potsdam, from Charles University in Prague and Tel Aviv University. Among the editors, we have Haim Fireberg, Olaf Glöckner, and Marcela Zoufalá. Today, we have a privilege and we are honored to host and to speak with Olaf, Marcela, but also we invited two more experts, two more excellent scholars. One is a young scholar and the second one is known, well-established, great established scholar, Professor Sami Smucha. So let us start and let me ask Olaf, tell us few words about the idea which stands behind the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first of all, Joanna, thank you very much for your kind introduction to our book project. As we know, Jewish life in Europe underwent very dramatic transformation within the 20th century, but also during the recent 30 years. And we know one of the biggest Jewish centers worldwide has continued to shrink in demographic terms. But at the same time, Jews in Europe have found new ways to outlast, to self-organize, and to interact with a still Christian-dominated mainstream society. Our book reflects on Jews in Central Europe, as you said, dealing with Jewish heritage, with modes of commemoration, Jewish learning, pluralism, and of course, the fight against old and new anti-Semitism. The authors in our volume do mainly focus on Hungary, the Czech Republic, Poland, Austria, and Germany. That means Central European countries with a very unique Jewish history and present. And the present is in the foreground of our book, also touching the question what Israel means for Jews in Central Europe today. Alia, as we know from these countries, is rather small scale, but how are strong individual ties? Do Jewish communities in Central Europe continue as a strong diaspora partner, or is there a trend of steady alienation? All these questions are in, but some of the texts deal also with Jewish political activism, political participation in the respective countries, and with cultural and religious reorientation. And subsequently with new interrelations, with cross-cultural trends, and with some Jews right in the middle of it. On the other hand, our book tells also stories of misunderstanding, of conflict, and of ethnic othering between Jews and non-Jews, but also among Jews. And we are quickly back on this way to those questions of special Jewish identity in Central Europe. Is there some Jewish Ashkenazi special or not? And if so, what does it mean for the rest of the Jewish and the non-Jewish world? Some intellectuals who are also authors in our books, like Rafi Vargo and Konstantin Gebert, are trying some answers in their essays. However, what I think is that our book makes also clear that Central European Jews and the Jewish communities, of course, as well, proceed with special bonds to both, to the Jewish diaspora and to Israel. So far from the book, I hand over back to Joanna.
Thank you, Olaf. Thank you for this synthetic but a very comprehensive introduction, and bringing us closer the content of the book, but also, or mostly, or the crucial problems which the contributions which the book contains are struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned a couple of things that that touches upon also the essence of our association activity, which is Jewish community in Europe, or the European Jewish diaspora, relations with the others. And here I'm coming with a couple of questions. I hope our experts, our great colleagues, to whom I'm going to pass the stage in a second, will try to answer. The question number one is, what are the relations between contemporary Jewish community, Jewish diaspora in Europe? What is the attitude, relations with Israel? How do they see their own relation with Israel, assuming also that diaspora since establishment of Israel has also undergone through a substantial identity change. Yeah. So these are questions which has been addressed in the book. And the research, empirical research done by the authors, for instance, Marcela, are leaving us with many other question marks. So let me just ask Lydia Averbuch. Lydia is to run the second part of our today's meeting. But let me also say a few words about Lydia, whom I met 2 years ago in Berlin. We had a I had a great pleasure to work with her in German Institute for International and Security Affairs, Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik. Lydia is a researcher who is concentrating in her research on several issues related to Israel, but also Israel's relations with its external partners, but in this social, cultural dimension. So Lydia, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for agreeing to support us and help us. And yeah, I'm turning into listening.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Thank you, Olaf. I will start by introducing the speakers. First, distinguished Professor Sami Smucha, who is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of Haifa. He coined the famous term ethnic democracy while was describing Israeli political system. And in 2008, Sami Smucha received the Israel Prize for Sociology. Marcela Zoufalá is a scientific researcher, lecturer, and deputy director at the Center for the Study of the Holocaust and Jewish Literature at the Faculty of Arts in Charles University in Prague. In the article that we will discuss next, Marcela reflects on how Czech Jews relate to the contemporary state of Israel. She argues that Czech Jews are distancing themselves from Israel for two reasons. First, because of the so-called Mizrahization of Israel, and secondly, because Israel fails to match their nostalgic idea of Jewish Central Europe between the wars. So Marcela, let me ask you some questions. Your findings are based on interviews with members of the Czech Jewish community, which is a homogeneous Ashkenazi community as far as I understand. So what do they understand by Mizrahization of Israel, and when do they encounter it?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lydia, and thank you everyone for such a nice and warm welcome and introduction. I am very honored to be invited into this podcast and to discuss this research outcome with those two distinguished colleagues as Professor Samucha and Lydia Averbuch. So perhaps let's begin with a quick figure on Czech Jewish community, which is rather of modest size. According Sergio de la Pergola, there is around let's say 3,090 members of Czech Jewish community within this so-called core population, and around 6,000 within this enlarged Jewish population. However, Federation of Jewish Communities in the Czech Republic launched another much higher estimation that there is actually living between 15 and 20,000 of Jews who are actually living in the Czech Republic nowadays, but they are not registered anywhere. This figure, this estimation of federation, may be supported by Operation Spider, so-called Operation Spider, run by secret totalitarian regime police during the so-called normalization times back to 70s in Czechoslovakia till 1988, just before Iron Wall fall, and they listed in their files about 20,000 names, so who were in fact Jews, or according this secret police file, it was a Jewish population which was followed and prosecuted by the totalitarian regime. So according to these figures, we would maybe support this higher estimation of Federation of Jewish Communities, though still it's a rather small size. To your question, Lydia, how Czech Jewish communities perceive Mizrahization of Israel, or let's say rather we should speak about Orientalization. This we can leave for later. I'm afraid Professor Samucha is out at the moment. Should we wait?
I think we can continue, and you can just elaborate further. Yeah.
Okay. So can you just maybe reframe the question? How Czech?
Yes. So I'm wondering, what do they understand by the so-called Mizrahization, and what does this attitude towards the demographic makeup of Israel has to do with the broader culture of the majority population of the Czech society? Just to understand how this very small community is seeing Mizrahization from so far, and when do they at all encounter it, and how do they understand it?
Mm-hmm. I would perhaps begin with one of the outcomes of the anthropological research which I carried between 2014 till 2018 within the Czech Jewish community, and you mentioned it in the beginning. It's this image of Central Europe and now we are not talking about Central Europe of nowadays. We are talking about rather, let's say, some mental or cultural construct which we could perhaps encounter in the writing of Czech French writer Milan Kundera, who describes this Central Europe in his famous essay, Tragedy of Central Europe. So this Central Europe, it's like a certain lost paradise or golden age in the imagination of some part of the Czech Jews. And they relate to it through contemporary Israel, or in the other words, they were hoping to find this lost Central Europe again in Israel, and they imagined Israel as rather the Ashkenazi one, this Israel of the founding fathers from Central and Eastern Europe. However, as you, Lydia, already suggested, the ethnic settings or ethnic makeup of Israeli society nowadays has been significantly changed, and we can even argue whether there is some procedure or process called Mizrahization, and we can find it in the public discourses, in the political discourses in Israel, which somehow embrace this higher visibility of Mizrahi population. So, in the other words, as a result of my research, I would argue that Czech Jews are somehow discomforted by these changing ethnical patterns which they encounter, which they find in the contemporary Israeli discourses, and perhaps not only discourses, but also they are facing it within the Prague, mostly Jewish community, and these encounters lead to a certain, let's say, changing attitude towards Israel as a whole. It somehow impacts their attitude and their even feelings towards Israel, which may not be anymore that overwhelmingly positive as it used to be, let's say, during the totalitarian era and post Velvet Revolution times.
So you said. Yes, thank you very much. I have a follow-up question. So we have several diaspora communities around the world that do distance themselves further and further from Israel, but due to political reasons. So there's no such thing to be seen in the Czech Jewish community, and if so, how would you explain this?
Yes, thank you for that question, because I forgot to mention that for the comparative framework, I chose American Jewish Diaspora for the reasons that it is the second largest Jewish population worldwide, right after Israel, and therefore there is plenty of research made on American Jews nowadays. So I was obviously curious what are the differences, and the mainly striking difference was, in my opinion, that American Jewish Diaspora distances itself from Israel for all these many times discussed and well-known reasons of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, then also Orthodox Judaism hegemony in Israel, and on the other hand, I was surprised that this argumentation line is not that that well articulated within the Czech Jewish community, and even though as I try to outline, this argumentation line appears within the predominantly younger generation of Jews in the Czech Republic, it's still comparing, let's say, Western countries rather weak. And these findings are supported, for example, also by the research of Professor Joanna Dyduch, who was with us here in the beginning. And she even argues that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict does not appear within the foreigner policies of the Visegrad countries as a strong topic. However, Joanna Dyduch says not only in the foreigner policy, but also as an internal social debate, it's this topic, it's rather meaningless. So naturally, I was asking if there is some distancing pattern within the Czech Jewish community detected. Why? What are the motives behind that? And this led me to this conclusion that it might be actually this Mizrahization process, which is to be considered within this context. And in my view, surprisingly, mentioning American Jewish community, I didn't find any substantial research on American Jews questioning these ethnical patterns, how these ethnical patterns may be influencing the attitudes of American Jews towards Israel. I was very surprised by that, and I would certainly suggest to conduct such a research, considering how similar its ethnical makeup of Czech Jewish community and American Jewish community, as might be even surprising that American Jews define themselves or identify themselves in 94% as white non-Hispanic, comparing to 66% of general public in the US. Means that it's certainly very similar in that point to the Central European Jewish community.
Thank you. Just one little question that I was hinting at before. Would you say that the political attitude of Czech Jewish community towards a Middle Eastern identity mirrors the majority attitude towards it?
Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting question. Well, I would say we definitely can argue that the Jewish minority in many aspects reflects and mirror the majority attitudes towards Israel and the Middle East, and all these attitudes are even somehow entangled, because if we would return to 1968, when the Czechoslovakia was occupied by Warsavian Pact armies. So before the occupation, there was a so-called Prague Spring, and during this Prague Spring, Israel was one of the important topics of among the Czech elites, Jewish and non-Jewish as well. And if we would return even one more year back, in 1967, just after the Six-Day War, which got these consequences that almost all Eastern Bloc under the button of USSR broke the diplomatic relations with Israel as a consequence of Six-Day War. So as a reaction on this, let's say, kind of very cold attitude and even mass media campaign against Israel, Czech writers at the end of June in 1967 formulated some stance for support of Israel and also for re-establishing the diplomatic relations. And this stance was issued, for example, by non-Jewish Reform Communist Pavel Kohout, who even compare Six-Day War with Munich Agreement in 1938. So we can see we could. This is very wide and rich topic, which could be certainly discussed for hours about the, let's say, shared set of collective memories between Israel and the Czech Republic populations, as it was, for example, framed in the book Slavic Jerusalem, written and published by Martin Wein a few years ago. So you are right. There is many common patterns in majority and Jewish minority Czech and Czechoslovak societies mirroring the patterns of Israel. However, I'm not certain if Czech majority society anyhow noticed this internal Jewish debate within Israel, like between or among Ashkenazim, Sfaradim, and Mizrahim. This may be perhaps something to investigate further.
Thank you, Sami. What do you think when we talk here about Mizrahization? Does it really take place? Is it useful to take this term, or is it conceptually wrong? Would you prefer to talk about Orientalization or Arabization or whatever? You need to unmute yourself. You're still muted. Yes, now.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. I'm okay now.
You are.
Yes.
Okay. I don't have any problem with the term. I mean, you can use any term you like on the condition that you define it, so that people know what you mean by the term. And I think this term, Mizrahization, Orientalization, might have different meanings. And I try to think today, what do we really mean by saying that Israel has become Orientalized? Now, one meaning could be demographic, that Mizrahi Jews have become, say, very significant group, maybe a majority. In 1965, Mizrahi Jews were a majority. But since then, they declined in their numbers, especially after the mass immigration from the former Soviet Union, which is 85% Ashkenazi. Now, so if we are talking about demography, yes, I mean Mizrahi Jews in 1947, at the time of Israel's creation, were only 20% of the Jews in Palestine at the time. And then they, because of the mass immigration, they became a majority. And I think one thing about, say, the distancing from Israel because of the strong presence of Mizrahi Jews is really the asymmetry between the demographic composition of Israel and the demographic composition of the Jews all over the world. I mean, if you take Mizrahi Jews in the Jewish people, they are about 15% of the Jews, because outside Israel, their presence is very small. I mean, 150,000 in the United States, about 300,000 in France, and so forth. But their presence there is very small. So in Israel, they constitute 3 times as much as in the Jewish people. So, I mean, I think this, for some Jews, this is something which is of inconvenience, you know, which they would like to see. Israel is more Ashkenazi than Mizrahi Jews. But I don't think the question is just demography. When we are talking about Mizrahization or Orientalization of Israel, we might talk about other meanings, not just about this. And one other meaning is that the Mizrahi Ashkenazi divide in Israel has become more intense, and part of the public issue, you know, in Israel. This is very strong. If this is the process, then it is really very, very strong. But I deny that. I don't think that is a real process, that Mizrahi Ashkenazi division has taken the public stage and the more important issue in Israel. Now, if we look at divisions in Israel, the most important division in Israel today is between Arabs and Jews. I mean, Arab citizens and Jews. I'm not talking about Palestinians in the West Bank under Israeli occupation, but we are talking about Israeli society. Palestinians in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, they are not part of Israeli society, and they are not part of the state. But if we take Arabs in Israel, of course, this division is very deep and also becoming more and more important in Israeli politics and society. Now, you take another division between religious and secular Jews. This is again has become more intense and more important for the Israeli politics and Israeli culture as well, because of religionization of Israel. So if you compare the two processes with religion and the process about Arabs and Jews, then the Ashkenazi Mizrahi divide is much smaller and much less important. Now, but there is another divide which has become more and more important, and this is the political divide between the political right and on the one hand, and the center left on the other. And this conflict is very important not just because of itself, the ideological differences between the two camps, but also because it intensifies the other two conflicts between religious and secular, and between Arabs and Jews. So if you take all these three conflicts and historical processes, then the divide between Mizrahi and Ashkenazi Jews is really much less important and more marginal. So that's another meaning that could be of Mizrahization of Israel, which I don't see it really coming. But I can give you more and more meanings of the process. I don't know what other people or what the Jews in the Czech Republic thought of this, but I can think as a sociologist about other meanings, about legitimacy of the conflict. This is very important. Can you speak today in public openly and freely about the divide between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi Jews? You cannot do it. If you do it, you will be accused of incitement, that you are using this to get some political gain. You know, it's not important. It's not, because it's considered anti-Zionist, because Zionism is for assimilation, for integration, for a melting pot, and so forth. And once you discuss it, just to discuss it, it's still not legitimate. So you want me? I can go and get more meaning of this.
Let me give it a bit another direction.
Is there any mobilization of Mizrahi Jews in Israel? Only by Shas. Shas states.
Yeah, I was about to ask it. What is the political component? Is there some changes in the political system due to this process or not?
Listen, if you Mizrahi Jews, the overwhelming majority of Mizrahi Jews support the right wing in Israel. This is something nobody cannot face. We have to face this, and this is why it is so in Israel is so important, because the right wing in Israel today has a majority, demographic majority and political majority. They have the support of Mizrahi Jews, the support of the Russian. I'm not talking about Likud. I'm talking about the political right, which includes the ultra-Orthodox, the national religious, including also the Likud and Israel, the Russian, the Israeli Betenu, you know, all this, and Yamina now. It's another, and now Sa'ar will be another one as well. It's all the political right, and they have a demographic majority and political majority. What I mean political majority, when you ask Jews today, how do you define yourself on the political spectrum? 60% of them, they say, I am a right-winger. 30% they say I am in the center or left, and 10% they don't know. I mean, they don't think in these terms, you know. So you can see for every one on the left center, there are two on the right wing. You know, I mean, this is why it is now Israel. Then this is the significance. I mean, the political significance of this, and it's very hard to shift Mizrahi Jews to the center and to the left. I'm saying to the shift, not because in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, when I studied this question, when a Mizrahi Jew became university educated, they left the Likud, they left the right wing and they went to the other side. It's no longer the process. Even the educated Mizrahi Jews remain on the political right. So it's very important question. But if Orientalization also means that Mizrahi Jews are culturally Arab and they feel close to the Arabs and they want also integration into the Middle East, and because some of the activists say, and especially politicians, Mizrahi politicians say, look, we understand better the Arabs. If we negotiate with the Arab, we can bring peace. All this have no relations with reality. Mizrahi Jews today, they lost their Arab culture and language. They don't. They have been Israelized in the Israeli Hebrew culture. They lost their language, their mother tongue today of Mizrahi Jews, the language they speak when they are born or in their families, it's Hebrew, no longer Arabic anymore. So they don't have an Arab culture and language. So I don't know why people say Mizrahi Jews today, they are Arabized or they're Arab. Not Arabs anymore. They have never been Arab, but this is another question, if they have ever been in history Arab Jews, what this term means. And also they are right-wingers. The political right doesn't want to integrate into the Middle East. They don't.
I think we lost something.
Yes, I'm afraid so. Perhaps I could react on a little bit.
Yes, please.
Lydia, if you got some thoughts, please go ahead.
You first.
Okay. I agree completely with Sami that Israel nowadays is facing many, probably more serious challenges than its this inter-ethnical divisions. However, I would say also that, or I just recalled what Professor Alan Doughty once wrote, that Israel, if the Israeli-Palestinian or Israeli-Arab conflict would be suddenly solved, that there would be a civil war at the moment. So this is just in support of the meaning or the significance of these inter-ethnical divisions. That I believe they got much more impact than we even realize on Israeli society, because many of these let's say social cultural mechanisms are somehow hidden or latent, or even work on a certain subconscious level. And however, I would maybe pick up on this or what Sami brought up, how we're supposed to call it, like if Mizrahi was it's somehow this term, it's accused of being invented by official, let's say, Zionist line. For example, Israeli scholar Ella Shochat she thinks that this is the case, and she argued that there should be rather a category Arab Jews or Jewish Arabs used for Mizrahi Jews instead. However, there is a problem that I think what also Sami mentioned, that many of Mizrahim and also a lot of Mizrahim scholars do not agree with this category of Arab Jew, and they don't see themselves as belong to it. And well, there is also a question of this like a subaltern, or in which way Mizrahim and Mizrahi culture or Arab Jewish culture was somehow like silenced and marginalized within the hegemonic discourse in Israel, which is clearly till nowadays rather Ashkenazi and Zionist than I don't know, Middle Eastern or Mizrahim. So I think to analyze this in a detail, we would perhaps somehow find out that it's much more important than we even realize. I really like to mention in this context there is this beautiful poem written by Almog Behar. It's the name is "I'm One of the Jews." It's a rather serial poem which won some contest in Haaretz a few years ago, and he's somehow portraying this nostalgia of Mizrahim and their longing for their maybe not even personally they perhaps never really lived in the countries of origin of their parents, but there is still this high level of nostalgia in that, and I think this should also become a part of the debate in a way, not only that yes, Mizrahi Jews were somehow Israelized, but still I think the extent of their own inner universe, it's quite underexplored. Sami, when you disappeared, we kind of denied everything what you said.
Okay. Listen, I mean, there are Mizrahi activists in Israel who stand for integration of Israel into the Middle East. Some of them are not Zionists, some of them are Zionists, depends, on their ideology. But, for me as a sociologist, I will always ask the question, how much following do they have? Do they reach the public opinion and support of Mizrahi Jews? And I can tell you, as a sociologist, I mean, observer of Israeli society and researcher, these people are not connected with the Mizrahi masses. They are not, because Mizrahi masses, as I know and as I research, because I do some research in this area, they do not want to recognize their Arab heritage. They take anti-Arab attitudes about integration to the Middle East and about Arab citizens in Israel. They have hawkish views about the solution of the Palestinian question. Why they always ask in Israel in public debates, why they are so much, and they have this attitudes and they don't change, and they have all kinds of explanation. I have about 5 explanations, but I have also very simple explanation. They are simply right wing. They express right wing ideas. They support right wing parties, and they hold the same right wing attitudes as Russian Jews who support right wing parties, as other Ashkenazi national religious people who also support the political right. They are not that different from other right wingers.
Marcela, I see you wanted to comment.
I would like to react on that, what you said, Sami, on how much they are disconnected from the Arab world, the Mizrahim. I believe that it may be simply the consequence of this predominant and for decades ruling Zionist narrative, which somehow taught Mizrahi Jews not to to kind of cut off their Arab roots, to somehow like whitewash themselves, to be yes, like somehow to give a precedence, to kill the inner Arab in a simple way. If there would be such a kind of feeling for of connection to the Arab world, it was simply in the prism of the mainstream Israeli narrative. It was not receiving any precedence, any support to somehow evolve this Arab heritage. And I see this is changing at the moment in Israel.
Listen, I mean, the word brainwashing, I reject totally. I mean, this idea that you can brainwash a group for a long time and you don't attribute to them agency, that they have their own will, they have their own thinking. I mean, this is, I think, not nice on our part as researchers to think of other people just as brainwashed. I mean, why you cannot admit that these people have become right-wingers? Now, another question, why they have become right-wingers? That's another question. But once you see that they are right-winger, then you can understand their attitudes. They simply are socialized. Now we are talking about Mizrahi Jews for 70 years. They are not newcomers, of the last 10 years. They are for 70 years, have been, at least only for the first 2 decades, they have been more into the labor hegemony and socialization. Afterwards, they have been under the right wing socialization. And they accepted the ideas of the right wing. Now, this is the simple explanation why they are so attached to the right, to the political right, and their views, on the conflict, on Arabs, on human rights, on democracy, and so forth. Because the differences today between left and right in Israel have to do about the Palestinian question. If you accept the partition of Eretz Israel, of Palestine, or you reject it, and the second about democracy and human rights. How much important are this? How should Israel be more Jewish or more democratic? I mean, both sides want Israel to be both democratic and Jewish, but the question is about the balance, and this is the main difference between today political right and center left, and Israel and Mizrahi Jews are clearly on the political right, and now here and there you find some activists. Yes, they are activists. And, the Israeli press and media, they like, to interview activists because they sound differently than the mainstream. But the question is, how much power do they have? Now, the question of orientalization, the real essence of the question is this. Mizrahi Jews are non-dominant group. This is clear. I mean, used to be. Now, orientalization or Mizrahization means they stop to be a dominant group They are now part of the dominant group in Israel. This is the meaning for me of, sociological meaning of Mizrahization. I can tell you from my understanding that Mizrahi Jews still are non-dominant group. They enjoy or participate in the political supremacy, not supremacy, the political power of the right wing in Israel. They do participate, and they have presentation, say, in the government. They have very good presentation in this government. But still, they are not the decision makers in Israel. They are not part of the intellectual elite. They are not part of the higher education and science and technology of Israel. They are not part of the cultural elite in Israel. Not even part of the economic elites in Israel. All these elites and power still not with the political right. Still, Ashkenazi Jews, secular Ashkenazi Jews, dominate Israeli society in the economy, in culture, in science, in technology, and so forth. And Mizrahi Jews on the other side. So what does it mean, the Orientalization of Israel? If all these elements are missing.
Yes, so I was once looking into the process of Mizrahization in terms of it might change politics and especially foreign politics. And from my findings, I totally agree with you, Sami. I think this term and the discussion around it, around the societal rift between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi Jews, is totally blown out of proportion. It takes a lot of space in popular media and in scientific discussion. I remember around some years ago, 2016, 17, there were several TV series dealing with this topic, and poetry and plenty of cultural projects focusing on Mizrahim, but they didn't influence the society in a deeper manner. And when I was thinking about how it might translate into politics and whether there are changes in the Israeli political landscape to come, yes, there are some changes. For example, the Israeli Workers' Party, Avodah, kept having Mizrahi party leaders. Since then, first Avi Gabay and then Amir Peretz. 4 years ago, there was not a single party leader from Avodah who was Mizrahi. And even in Meretz, a purely Ashkenazi party in regard to both members and voters, they had 2 Mizrahi candidates for leadership at one time. Though there was a moment when the so-called Mizrahi card became relevant, especially for parties who were accused of being elitist. But in regard to foreign politics, I think there was no Mizrahization at all happening. And the divide between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim has only implications for Israeli domestic politics. Not for security affairs, not for foreign politics, not foreign politics in global, but not even foreign politics outside the door in regard to Palestinian conflict, I say. And there's a current example of the normalization process with Gulf countries going on, for example. It also neither involved Mizrahi politicians, nor was it based on any shared cultural ground between Israelis and Emiratis, for example. It was rather about security interests. And actually, even in the time, in the situation of today, having a Mizrahi foreign minister, Gavi Ashkenazi, who was not involved at all or consulted. So I think there might be changes and there might be a process of Mizrahization, but it's on a very limited scale, connected to media mostly and culture in Israel.
I may just add that I would argue that we can see the beginning of the process, and that there are things changing. And for example, few years ago there was inaugurated day of refugees from Arab countries and Iran on November 30. And this was quite long-awaited recognition of heritage of Mizrahi population, and a part of this, I think, it's shaping the current political discourse in Israel in a quite significant way, and that the discussions are evolving around. For example, in the beginning of this year, I think February, we witnessed so-called Darbuka scandal, which involved the statement of member of Knesset, Yaoz Handel, who were distinguishing between Ashkenazim and Mizrahim in a little bit insensitive way, and he was accused of racism. He said something that some people came to Israel from environment of Viennese opera, and they brought this mindset with them to Israel. On the other hand, other people came from the countries of Darbuka culture, something like this, and it was picked by many journalists, of course, and it's kind of launched quite a debate. And also Miri Regev, as Ministry of Culture, kind of ostentatively protested against it, and then during some political rally, she even she invited some musicians to play on Darbuka in order to show how important part it represents. So the culture of Jews from Arab countries and Iran. I believe that, of course, there is a lot of things to still be developed and improved, and this definitely do not represent the most important issue nowadays in Israeli inner or external debate. But I see that it would be, there is a great potential. And just last remark, Lydia, to what you mentioned, this stabilization of Middle East. I believe there may be a lot of let's say common language which may be found between Israeli Mizrahim and the rest of the Middle East, and that there may be definitely. The question will be which face of Israel the rest of Middle East will prefer to see and emphasize, and if it may be the face of Mizrahi Jews and their higher visibility, which somehow can also improve the relations, not only on a political level but also within the mainstream populations.
Yes. I doubt, though, that we can talk about stabilization. I think it's rather the opposite, since it was a security agreement first and foremost against other parties in the Middle East. But yeah, we will see if Gulf states prefer Israel seen as Mizrahi or Ashkenazi country, if it does play a role at all. Sami, what do you think?
I think all these treaties with the Amorites and so forth have nothing to do with Mizrahi Ashkenazi divide at all. I mean, it's not, and also these treaties have nothing to do with Israel's orientation toward the Middle East. I mean, all these treaties are economic and security and maybe touristic, but have nothing to do with culture, nothing to do with bringing Israel into the Middle East? I would say the opposite. Israel wants to end the conflict with the Arab world in order to become Western, not to integrate into the Middle East, but to exit from the Middle East culturally and to be more acceptable to Europe. I mean, if this will be possible, I mean, if Israel will reach agreement with the Palestinians, maybe Israel can become a member of the EU. This is what Israel wants, not want to be part of the Middle East, because Israelis, Ashkenazi Jews, and Mizrahim, they don't see anything of value in the Middle East. That's the way they perceive the Middle East. Now, some intellectuals, Ashkenazi and Mizrahi intellectuals, they say, look, we have to see the historical process, we have to see the future, we are part of this area, we have to integrate, you know, I mean, all these ideas, but these ideas do not appeal to the people, to the population at large, and they are not changing reality. There is one area in which the Mizrahi question affects foreign policy is about their status as refugees, as a population which was now the Israeli propaganda say they are all of them were kicked out from the Arab states, and their property was confiscated, and all this time they became completely refugees, like the Palestinian refugees. You know, like it's not the same. I mean, that's it. But the American Congress and the EU, not the EU, UN accepted Mizrahi Jews as refugees. And they say also when the Palestinian question will be settled, or will be treaties between Israel and Iran, treaties between Israel and Iraq and so forth, the Jews from Arab countries have to be compensated, and their interest has to be taken into consideration. The Knesset also passed a law which demands from the government, when it will negotiate with Arab countries, to take into consideration the property and which was lost in Arab countries and so forth. So this is now why Israel is doing it, and it denying doing it, did not do it only recently, because they are using this as a plea against the Palestinians. They say, look, our Jewish refugees, we integrate into Israel, we absorb them, they are fine, they are citizens and so forth. Why the Arabs in Lebanon, in Jordan, and not in Jordan, but in other areas, in Iraq and other Arab parts of why they don't absorb the Palestinians? I mean, that is the thinking of the Israeli government, using the ethnic problem, you know, as a weapon against the Arab world and against the Palestinians. But saying that, I will also have to add that the way Jews were treated in the 40s by the Arab world is disgraceful. I mean, the Jews were treated very badly in the 40s and the 50s by Arab states, and they played a great deal. You know, their role was very strong in having the Jews leaving these countries and coming to Israel. So, and they cannot say we didn't do anything. They did. There were pogroms against the Jews in the 40s in Arab countries. the government in Iraq reached a treaty with Israel that the Jews will leave, and they took their property and so forth. I mean, they did a lot of things which made it impossible for Jews to stay in Arab countries.
Just a quick remark. I completely agree with Sami that there is no doubt some political agenda behind the inauguration of the Day of Refugees. Still, I would say this doesn't change the fact that it was kind of long-awaited gesture from the Israeli official line and towards Mizrahi population, and it is appreciated, and this recognition, I would say, was quite play a meaningful role within internal Israeli discourses.
All right, thank you, Marcela. Thank you, Sami. I think it's a good time to wrap it up now. And we tackled on so many different issues, and we didn't agree on many of them, which is even better. And it was a pleasure to host this talk with you.
Thank you very much for having me in this EIS discussion. This is the first podcast? No, it's not the first.
Third.
The third, okay.
The third. Yeah, I thank you so much for having me as well. It was great pleasure, and I see already there is many topics we could discuss further.
Yes, so let me rejoin this conversation with a closing remark. So of course, on behalf of the association, I would like to thank you very much for reserving and dedicating your time and your expertise and sharing it with us. I found the topic, of course, fascinating, but you left me with a number of questions. And due to limited time, we don't want to hold this meeting or to make this meeting long, in order to capture the attention of the viewers, potential viewers. But still, it seems, yes, Sami, this is our third online event, but definitely not the last one. And we will definitely need to continue. What I felt important is to maybe explore a little bit more of these changes within Israel or within Israeli society related to both the nature of politics, discourses, and identity, and their consequences for the European-Israeli relations. So Israel is not anymore only like a European project in the Middle East, as we really very much in these European discourses wanted to think or wanted to see it as some kind of, Israel is a kind of a European island in the Middle East. It is not anymore purely European island in the Middle East, and even the Ashkenazi or the Israelis who are having European roots or roots in Europe are not that clear as some decades ago about the linkages between Israel and Europe nowadays. So maybe these are questions we may address next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.